today we have actually a pretty familiar figure who will be presenting today, Dr. Larry Hergott. Dr. Hergott has been a cardiologist and was a cardiologist at Kaiser for over 20 years. He served as a cardiologist here at the university for 17 years. He left clinical practice in 2016 to spend and devote his time to writing of philosophical essays and poems, mostly about how medical practitioners and their loved ones lead the medical life. Larry has over 50 publications of essays, poems, and photographs, and those highly touted clinical publications, including the New England Journal of Medicine, the Annals of Internal Medicine, the Journal of the American Medical Association, Ars Medica, and others. And 2 writing awards have been named for him: the Heart of Medicine Award at the University of Colorado, which I worked with him to create, and the Lawrence Hergott Award in Writing, a national award co-sponsored by Southern Methodist University and Texas Health Presbyterian Hospital in Dallas. So please welcome someone I think you all know and admire and love as much as I do, and that's Dr. Larry Hergott.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming over. Thanks, Tess, for that nice introduction. Wherever David is, I want to thank David Weil, because he's the guy who always puts these things together, and he's done a great job. So it's great for him to be here with me. Before we go into the readings, I have to stand here, I'm told, so I can't, I don't trust this man anyway, and I'm wondering if we can switch out. But, oh, there you are. Good. I'm glad you're here, too. So I'm going to just be turned against you. I'm sorry. If I move around, this is being recorded, then I get out of this screen part, which is okay with me, actually. But I'm going to stand right here. So we have a little special thing for you, the first thing before we get to the readings, and that's a 3-minute, 6-second mini documentary on the BBC about some of the work I've done here besides just the cardiology work. So we're going to do that first.
I'm a human cardiologist. I mean, I treat human patients, and I started working at the Denver Zoo about 14 years ago. And when I first got the call, I asked the head veterinarian why he was calling an adult human cardiologist. And he said that the hearts of the gorillas were so much more like human hearts that the veterinary school cardiologists wouldn't really know what to do. The first animal we worked on here was a very large, he weighed 515 pounds. His name was Kundu. And his father had died of a human cardiac condition. So all the veterinarians and staff wanted Kundu checked to make sure he wasn't at risk. The staff has done this amazing thing to take both gorillas and orangutans and have them hold on to the mesh of the cage, put their chest like this, and we can put a probe, an ultrasound probe, through the square mesh and move it around, and we're getting these beautiful echocardiographic pictures. And the keeper is using the probe with the right hand, and she's popping peanuts in the mouths of the animals with the other.
Good job. All right. Good. See, there's nothing on there. Where's your chest? Yeah.
Here on this computer is a picture of a human heart pumping, and on the other screen, this is the heart of a gorilla. And the 2 images look exactly alike. Animals who are not in the wild, they can get high blood pressure, they can get high cholesterol. And as they're brought to us on a gurney into the animal hospital where we are, you realize right now that that's your patient. It's just like as if it were a human patient. It would be easy to just step back and think about how wonderful this is and to feel the fur and do this and do that. But you realize in that moment you're totally responsible for this animal, just like you would be with a human. I decided I wanted to be a doctor when I was 15. And probably for a little bit of a different reason, there was a TV show called Ben Casey. I liked science. Wanted to help people. From age 15, I finished my training when I was 33. So for 18 years, I was trying to be a cardiologist. This much here. So this. The trouble we're having in the United States, doctors, is that we're often practicing medicine as prose rather than the poetry it really is. To be with these animals, even after this long, once you're in their presence, is just this sort of connecting and soulful experience that it's hard to describe. Everybody would like to be experiencing these animals.
Well, you can imagine that there's everything wondrous about these animals, being with these animals, and even the most basic stuff, the genus, species, subspecies designations are gorilla, gorilla, gorilla. I mean, it just goes on and on about how wonderful it was to do that. The BBC crew actually came to campus and was talking to somebody here about a researcher about how the funds, national funds are going to be changed and for remuneration of research. But they sort of finished what they needed to do with him very quickly. So they, the PR person who was with them answered the question. The BBC people said, well, is there anything else going on that's interesting around campus? Well, you know, it's like, you know, there are 500 or 1,000 things interesting about what's going on around campus. But the PR person said, well, you know, we've got this guy who takes care of gorillas. And so they hung around with us for 3 days, different parts of days, and they had this thing. Now, we were scheduled to be on BBC America, but we got bumped. Margaret Thatcher went and died on me and spoiled my 3 minutes and 6 seconds of fame. That you can find that little video on bbc.com if you just search Hergott, or on YouTube, Healing the Hearts of Men and Gorillas, if you're interested in that, or having somebody else do it. I do want to explain the title of our lecture. The title of the lecture is In Quest of the Scholar and His Cat. And The Scholar and His Cat is a poem, an anonymous 9th century Celtic poem about the responsibilities of a scholar and his cat. And the cat's responsibilities are to catch mice, but that's all they have to do. But there's a sort of long explanation of what the scholar is doing. And I took out of there just a couple of little lines that sort of interested me and sort of made me do the thing. It says, better far than praise of men, 'tis to sit with book and pen. I get wisdom day and night, turning darkness into light. And simply said, it's this and the sharing of it that I'm reaching for in the writing. Now, during this hour, I'll be reading some poems and essays of others and mine, mostly mine, and we'll have our dear friend Julie Swaney help me by reading some of the things that I cannot read for reasons that will be obvious. Julie's the head of spiritual care services here at the University of Colorado. As we go along, I'll try to share some background about how these essays and poems came to be as well. Not long after I had done a fair amount of writing and got some publications, I realized that there was a style to my writing, that it was a heart-to-heart or soul-to-soul conversation with the reader. And I was thus hoping to share something both meaningful and beautiful. And hopefully that's some of what we've been able to do. Though most of the poems and essays and photos have been published in medical journals, much of what is shared relates to all kinds of people, and non-medical people as well, certainly. And I would like to invite those here who are not in the medical field, that if you get identified or have personal relevance in some of the things that are expressed, to include yourself in what is written. And you'll see more about that as we go along. I'd like to start the reading not by a poem of mine, but by a man named Raymond Carver. Tesla is very knowledgeable about Raymond Carver. Raymond Carver had an inordinately troubled life, largely based on his alcoholism. And he died at the age of 50 from lung cancer. At the end of his life, he wrote a poem called Late Fragment. And this is the last poem in the last book of his poetry book. And it's also on his tombstone. And so in the poem, there are two questions asked. And I think both of those questions pretty much relate, especially to those of us who could be called seniors. Other people may have meaning for this as well, but I think you'll see what I mean when I recite this. So there are two questions that get answered in Late Fragment. And did you get what you wanted from this life? Even so, I did. And what did you want? To call myself beloved, to feel myself beloved on the earth. And so let me do that again. And did you get what you wanted from this life? Even so, even all the troubles you've had, did you get what you wanted? I did. And what did you want? To call myself beloved, to feel myself beloved on the earth. I'll just leave that there and we'll go on. I won't say anything else about it. A recently published poem of mine called The Clearing has sort of a tangential relevance to Raymond Carver's poem, and especially having to do with critical decisions leading to at least the opportunity of making life-saving changes. And this is called The Clearing. All of these poems have been published. Most have been Annals of Internal Medicine, a couple of others in different places that I'll mention, but this is called The Clearing from Annals. It came to him just after his hand left the cold metal rail and he began to drop. Before, a leaden shroud of sadness and separation led him to deem his agony no longer bearable. So, to end his torment, he jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge. What came to him as he fell, tumbling and flailing, was a thought unexpected. The only real problem in your life is that you just jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge. He saw the thing that mattered, that made the rest disperse, that needed attention utterly. Having seen, he fought to right himself, did, and lived. Seeing the thing that mattered and righting himself, he lived. So an opportunity to make changes, critical changes from what mattered. When I submitted this to Annals of Internal Medicine, the editor, Michael Lacombe, liked it, but he said, I don't think I can publish this because I don't think people can survive jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge. And I had remembered from probably 13 years ago an article in the New England Journal, not the New England Journal, in the New Yorker, that actually talked about a few people who had done that, who had survived, and then what their lives were like afterward, how it happened to them, etc. From the time you jump until you hit the water is 4 seconds. But these people all did correct the way they landed and things like that because they realized that they didn't want to die. There's some like 1,300, 1,400 people who have jumped off the bridge, and only about 30 have survived. One woman in this article survived, didn't want to survive, so she jumped again and she died. But he did allow me to do this when I said, listen, this happens. Essentially, everything I've written begins with something I've experienced that has touched me. An essay that begins with a very poignant story about an elderly man that I got called to see for chest pain serves as an example. The essay is titled Contemplating the Loss of the Last GI from World War II. This was published in the Denver Post the Sunday before Veterans Day several years ago. The essay begins with my entering his room, and he sort of had his gown open. He had a huge, huge scar. And it was obviously post-traumatic. He had injured, somehow gotten that injury, but considering its location and his longevity, there actually was some luck in the end that you could tell. So I asked him, "Where did you get that?" I asked gently. "Guadalcanal," the patient flatly replied, expert at ending such discussion. After another gaze at the scar, I countered, "You know, we must never forget what you guys did for us." As a withdrawn stare suddenly overtook the patient's face, a barely perceptible mist came to his eyes. Just as rapidly, a profound sense of humility came to me, aware then of being in the presence of valor. Time is running out on even the last GI from World War II. Having entered the world early in the course of one century, he now quietly prepares to withdraw early in the next. Swept into his young life's perilous challenge with a body that was strong and sustaining, he now likely deals with its natural degeneration in mobility, endurance, cognition, sight. Fortunate if he is not as alone now as he was in the most hazardous moments of his initial great challenge. Efforts then spent defending the liberty of the masses, he now deals with the loss of some personal freedoms that disease and degeneration bring. Who is the last GI, and what does he mean to us? To answer that question, I began to ask World War II veterans that I saw as patients what it was like for them to serve. I interviewed several of them in their homes, and every one of them brought out some kind of memorabilia from the war. Everything from German pistols to various medals to Japanese swords. A Normandy veteran suffering from a recent stroke, who also fought in the Battle of the Bulge, liberated concentration camps, and made it to the Elbe River, was visited in his home in Greeley, Colorado. One of his most prized of World War II artifacts, among several dropped onto his kitchen table, was a pocket-sized copy of the New Testament with a tin front cover. Given to him in December 1941 by his wife of 3 weeks, he carried it in his left shirt pocket for the duration of his marches and battles. To protect my heart from a shell, he related, literally and metaphorically. The patient, this essay ends with this. The patient with the chest scar survived. Another World War II veteran, also admitted with a small myocardial infarction about the same time, was less fortunate. An acute cardiac rupture on the third day after his heart attack, in the setting of a previous coronary bypass operation in a 79-year-old who had ordered that no extraordinary means be expended in his care, added up to mitral valve leakage, irreversible shock, and death within hours. This 10th Mountain Division War Hero's past social history included more than 9,000 hours of volunteer service logged in at the Denver VA Medical Center after his time in the service, and a career as a medal finisher to support his wife and children. Middle-aged and graying adults now, who poignantly wept and called loudly to him as he lay intubated, paralyzed, and sedated. Having several minutes alone with him near the end, I gazed at him, saddened that I had nothing substantial to offer this wonderful gentleman. Doing all I could to assure his comfort, I left, awaiting the call from the medical resident, which came in the pre-dawn, informing me of the patient's death. Looking back and reflecting on what I have learned since, I wish I had at some time said more to him. What? I would have expressed my deep gratitude for what he did long ago, enabling me to be at his side, to be of service to him and others. I have imagined what else I would like to have communicated to him and what I would like to say to other veteran patients. When I awaken, I have a different thought each morning, not the same one I would have if my family and I were not free. Our children are healthy, educated, and on their way to using their natural talents. There is no one watching us. We can go where we want, do what we want within the mild constraints of a civilized society, and not only think, but say what we want. Our beliefs are our own, and our right to express them or not is protected by the very foundation of our country. I have worked very hard for a long time to be a good doctor, and have been able to live out the dream of my youth. Had you not been courageous, I could not say these things. I owe a lot to you and those who went before and beside you. I want to thank you personally for that. I will never forget what you did for my family and me, and I will never take for granted the things for which you sacrificed. My first published essay had the title of The Time of the Three Dynasties, Reflections on Imbalance in the Practice of Medicine. The title comes from a quote from Thomas Merton's translation of The Way of Chuang Tzu. And the quote is, "From the time of the three dynasties, men have been running in all directions. How could they find time to be human?" The story of the essay begins one evening when we were watching the Democratic National Convention, and we got a phone call. Diane took the call and fell to her knees sobbing, as she had just been told that her brother David had just died in a farm accident. When we went back to Minnesota to be with David's family, a wife and 6 kids, ages 2 to 12, I learned more about his life and the stresses he had, which in their essence were similar to those that physicians have, a farmer. Heavy, often isolated, and seemingly imposed workloads, the pressures of time, achievement, income, and other responsibilities, the primacy of work over all other interests, although the principles often claim otherwise. After supper on that midsummer evening, feeling that there was still more that he had to do, he took a tractor mower, and went to clear some thick brush around the fields of his mother's farm. A line of fence wire got caught in the large blade, and at 8:30 p.m., knowing better, he positioned himself under the heavy piece of equipment to free the wire. David placed the arm of the mower on an upside-down paint can, and he knew better. Then something shifted, slipped, and he died. There could be no sophisticated medical intervention, not even a resuscitation. He was dead within a few horrible minutes, his chest crushed, his mother there to witness it after his agonized call. The sight of his lifeless body was so disturbing that people gathered at the scene would not allow his wife to look at him, but only to hold his cold hand as it lay exposed at the edge of the tarp that covered him. It took 6 men to lift the mower off his body. Similarities of David's stresses and those of physicians made me recall several stories people shared with me about imbalance in medicine. And I just sort of started thinking about these and started writing them. One, the first I'll mention is something a senior professor had told me when I was a medical resident. And this is a quote from him. "I always tell the residents' wives, of course, I always tell the residents' wives not to expect that the long hours, absence from the home, and hard work will change once their husbands go into practice. This was the same man whose wife had found an undelivered letter in their daughter's bedroom drawer after she went away to college, telling him that over the years he had sacrificed his family for the sake of his medical practice, and had thus stolen something from her. Another letter, forgiving him years later, was carried daily in his briefcase for the rest of the time I knew him. A prominent thoracic surgeon in Houston, the editor of at least one surgical text, told me that his goal when he left the home each morning was to get back before the 10 p.m. news. I never made it, he said, And after several years of this, he finally gave up a very lucrative and prestigious practice in cardiovascular surgery for one in preventive medicine. I last saw him here in Denver a few years ago with his wife watching their son play college lacrosse. I think of him as one of the most courageous physicians I have ever met. My medical school's 20-year reunion information form requested data not only on the location and type of practice, but also information about the doctor's spouses. Number one, number two. Finally, when one of my partners at Kaiser was in an earlier, busier practice and was gone much of the time, his son asked his mother, "Did Daddy die?" We are privileged to have that mother and father here today. The essay states and ends, "These vignettes are all about accomplished and upright individuals who are of great service to their patients. The story's theme of imbalance and its consequences does raise the question, however, about whether our professional focus is one of the shadows cloaked in light that Balthasar Gracian warned us about in the 17th century. Golden handcuffs are still handcuffs. Our successes call to mind a passage in the Tao Te Ching that speaks of a water-bearing vessel that tips over when filled to the brim, but remains upright when filled to a lower level." The essay ends with 4 short questions that the editor at Annals, they published this in Annals, did not want me to include. And I said, no, we have to. I was totally naive. This is my first publication. I'm telling this guy, senior editor at Annals, that I wanted to do it. So I did it. And he said, all right. So the 4 questions are for the Annals of Internal Medicine to medical practitioners. How are you? And yours? What would they say? Do you dare ask them? A short essay, it was not meant to be a short essay, has a similar theme. Having had poems published in Journal of the American Medical Association and Annals of Internal Medicine, I thought it might be fun to try for one of the other big-time journals. And so I submitted an essay to the Canadian Medical Association Journal. So I got this sort of quick response from them, and they said, "We like the writing, but we only want the first 3 paragraphs." Now, this is out of like 20 paragraphs. And she said, "We like the writing, we have 3 paragraphs, and I especially like the twist at the end." I didn't know there was a twist at the end. But if one of the top 5 medical journals in the world wants to publish it, I gave it to them to publish. This is the story of Dr. Kevin Miller, who's a cardiothoracic surgeon at St. Joe's. And his wife Kelly has agreed, both of them have agreed to let me tell this story and submit it and have it published. The story begins several years before I wrote the essay. On one Friday evening when Kevin had just moved to town, his partners had sponsored an open house for him and his family. And so we all got to meet them and walk around and look at the offices and stuff. And I noticed on his desk a very small photo just sitting there in a frame. Now, years later, when I decided to write about what I saw, I called Kevin and to ask if the photo was still in his desk, just out of interest. He took the call in his office and said, "Yes, I'm here now. I'm just picking it up." And there was a sort of a long silence. And then I heard him weeping. And this is their story. This is called Desktop Photos. The small photograph that sits alone on the office desk of a surgical colleague tells a life-saving story. Indicative of its importance to him, the photo has rested on his desk since the day he first occupied the office nearly a decade ago. Like the other artifacts he has placed around the room, though, each chosen for its meaning or its beauty, over time the photo has assumed a background role. He hardly notices the objects as he does his work there. Attention is directed instead toward papers that cross his desk, images that come and go on his computer screen, work on the phone, staff and colleagues entering and leaving, and ever-present thoughts in between about clinical or administrative duties. But the manner in which he attends to these, the way he treats his patients, and even how he performs their operations has much to do with the stories the artifacts tell. They're reflective of the formative and sustaining things he has experienced that make him the doctor in person he is. On a recent occasion, he did take the picture off his desk to look at it, and what it conjured brought him to tears. For the life saved in the story the picture tells is not the life of a patient, but of his own family. The picture shows two little girls in their pajamas sitting on a bed, holding a large telephone. They are saying goodnight to him, their father, still at work. This they commonly did since he was a member of a group that scheduled operations well into the evening. Present in this scene, though not in the picture, is the girl's mother, who took the photo for reasons and feelings of her own. The scene speaks of innocence, separation, unfortunate and recurring compromise, and hints at possible regrettable future realities. Inscribed on the picture are the words, "Thank you, Daddy." An obscure inclusion until he explains "Thank you, Daddy" was written by the girls later. The picture then framed and presented to their father in thanks for his leaving that practice, for one that allowed him to be home most evenings. The completed scene speaks of caring, responsiveness, optimism, and wholeness. The photo serves as an emotive reminder for him of what was and what might have been, and of what is. The family together and well, and he perhaps the most thankful of all for having made the decision he did. And he perhaps the most thankful of all for having made the decision he did. So that was the twist. A fair question to ask is, do these essays and poems really make any difference or have an effect on readers? Or is the telling just sort of a nicely written story that is an interesting read? I usually get, after essays, I get probably a little over 200 emails or other communications from people that I respond to who tell me they like the essay or they want to tell their story, different things, but they're very affirming in that way. So I know that some people, some journals like that, and it's made a difference, a little bit of a difference to them. A vivid example of how an essay or a poem can affect a reader, though, has to do with a poem called "A Small Sacred Space." This was written for a friend who was anticipating the removal of a brain tumor from a very vulnerable space. This is called "A Small Sacred Space." When the staples come out and the bone beneath has healed, and your flowing hair, artfully parted during, covers the scar after, there will be nothing seen of what preceded. If the silken movements of your Persian surgeon's hands are allowed to do what they crave to do, you will wake up to no important difference between who you are and who you are. You will recognize you. But as you fear, if the misplaced membrane in that small sacred space cannot yield at this chiasm of your life, and tragedy attempts to insinuate itself, you may be different. My most fervent wish is to assure your normalcy after. I cannot. I can assure you that those of us who love you now will long to love and be loved by you then, no matter what. You will not be alone. You will not be apart. Me? I want to feel again your adoring smile, one way or the other. So the editor of Annals, Dr. Michael Lacombe, who does all these things, he's in charge of all the essays and poems for Annals of Internal Medicine, and he has done that for decades. also occasionally recites, not for every poem, but for some poems, he recites things, makes a recording of them so that people who are online subscribers can listen to the poem, because they'll never know, they don't get the journal. So he did that. And David and I tried to play his reading today, but the volume of the read in here wasn't very high, so we had to not do that. But we wanted to play it for you because as Dr. Lacombe, something about Dr. Lacombe as he said these words: "I want to feel again your adoring smile, one way or the other." He paused for several seconds on the read and then started reading again. And he continued and finished the sentence. He very quickly after that sent me a copy of the audio, expressing very purposely that he had decided not to re-record and make it a little more smooth the recording, but that his emotions would be on the recording as well. So on occasions when things like this have happened before, and this is not the first time this has happened to me, I've said to people, you know, to bring editors to tears is a really good thing. That's a good thing about the writing. But what I really feel is that writing something that brings an editor or another reader, some other reader, to tears also brings a humbling and grateful feeling to me of having had the very great privilege of using words profoundly and well for the benefit of someone else. A feeling that, as with the practice of medicine, is too sacred to be anything other than humbling and grateful. Reflecting on this, while in no way claiming any of this for myself, by the way, what I'm about to say here, I recall a lovely statement from Alan Bennett's play and movie, The History Boys, that serves as an inspirational example of the meaning and benefit of such a privilege. And one of the essays I wrote, I put this in, and it says, "The statement is made with quiet sincerity by a high school teacher to a thoughtful student who has just recited from memory and obviously been moved by a poem by Thomas Hardy. The teacher states, 'The best moments in reading are when you come across something, a thought, a feeling, a way of looking at things that you'd thought special, particular to you, and here it is, set down by someone else, a person you've never met, maybe even someone long dead. And it's as if a hand has come out and taken yours.' For reasons unclear to me, I once recited a poem at a dinner party in Dallas, Texas. Diane and I were there with other people at this meeting, that literature and medicine meeting that is hosted in Texas each year, and we get invited to come. The award was given that year actually to Dr. Lacombe. We give an award to someone who's had a major role in literature and medicine. And so it turned out that year it was Dr. Michael Lacombe from Annals who was going to get the award. He's sitting across the table from me. It's sort of quiet at some point in the evening, and I recited the poem. And he pointed his finger at me and he said, "I want you to send me a poem every month." And I didn't quite do that, but I've had several sent, and all of them basically published. But I had to go way back to my unsubmitted poems from years ago, just in my hard drive, to keep, sending these things. One of them was written at least 20 years ago, and it's still hanging over our kitchen sink. It sits there, and it's been published as well. A typical series of events when you submit these poems is, first they give you a notification they've received your submission, and then you wait. And if you get something within 24 or 48 hours, it's not good. It's not good. You get rejected. But after that, it may take weeks and weeks and weeks for the editors to get back to you. And they could either come back and say, "We're rejecting it," or "We're accepting it, but we want something to change," or "We're accepting it just totally." So, and that could take weeks and weeks. So I submitted one of these other poems, these 20-year-old poems, called Tragedy of Shadows, to Dr. Lacombe, to Annals. And 2 hours later, I got an email accepting the publication, or the poem. So I've heard songwriters say, you never mostly know if it's going to be a hit or not. You just sort of wait and see what people think of it. So the one I was submitted, you got in 2 hours, got accepted. It was awarded the 2015 Annals Poetry Prize, which was graded as the best poem published in Annals that year. And I really don't know why, but I'll read it very quickly for you. This is called Tragedy of Shadows. We'll neither know what shaped your choice, the thing or things that stopped you. I cannot know without your voice. Your voice entombed chose not to say or even glance at what it was that stilled the dance. So this is an email about, or a poem about a failed relationship in our family. I still, I'm happy that it happened. I would like to go now to an essay, and we won't spend too much time with this essay. It says, it's titled Playing the Moonlight Sonata from Memory, Celebrating the Wonders of Our Difficult Life. And this essay begins with the most tragic event of my clinical career. And so I've asked Julie to read it for me.
The sound of a coffin hitting earth is a sound utterly serious. Antonio Machado, The Burial of a Friend. Give wine, give bread, sit. Feast on your life. Derek Walcott, Love After Love. I think about him several times a year, even now, more than 30 years later. When I do, it is with uncomfortable clarity and a surge of briefly incapacitating sadness and guilt. He had come to the office at the age of 62, troubled by chest tightness and shortness of breath with exertion. Intelligent and gentle, he was the kind of person you would look forward to seeing over the years. His physical examination revealed a heart murmur suggestive of severe aortic valve stenosis, narrowing, which implied a potential reduction of blood flow to the entire body with physical effort. My training, completed just months before, had taught me that it was too dangerous to exercise such patients to assess whether their symptoms were cardiac in origin. Rather, cardiac catheterization to determine the severity of the stenosis and coronary angiography in preparation for aortic valve replacement were appropriate. In the practice world, though, many physicians exercised such patients routinely. And after conferring with colleagues who were my senior, I put my patient on the treadmill. Not long into the test, he suddenly said he felt very bad. He lost the rhythm of his gait and was unable to keep up with the treadmill, which we quickly stopped. Woozy and barely able to step off the belt, he turned his head up and slumped to the floor. The electrocardiogram showed a regular heart rhythm and was without evidence of heart attack. His blood pressure was unobtainable. The pathophysiology of what had happened was obvious. Exercise-induced vasodilation and hypotension in the setting of what truly was severe aortic stenosis. Also clear was the necessity of rapid resuscitation if we were to save his life. But the resuscitation was unsuccessful, and he died there on the floor without regaining consciousness. Stunned, the nurses and I knelt silent and immobile next to him. But the horror was not over. I still had to phone his wife, who waited at home. Making the call was, in its way, as hard as witnessing the death. She, too, seemed a lovely person, and though dazed, was remarkably understanding. She related that just before he left the house, he had told her, "If they put me on the treadmill, I don't think I will make it." He had not expressed that to me, deferring to the judgment of his cardiologist. I've wondered over the years how long he might have lived had we been able to replace his aortic valve successfully. Would he have been alive when I thought about him in 1990, in 2000, in 2010? Is she alive? Did she live the rest of her life alone? There are two ways the death of a loved one affects people. The dying process is one, the loved one's absence the other, and often worse. She suffered the shock of the first and the loneliness of the latter. So much in life depends on who comes beside. Their journey together ended with his coming to see me. I expressed my sorrow to her then, and would again if given the chance. It is painful to write about, and utterly serious still.
Thank you, Julie. The essay goes on to discuss how devastated we feel when harm is done to a patient, whether it was something, a mistake we made, or from the intrinsic risk of treatments. But the essay also goes on to talk about the wonders of medicine and how we can use these to sustain us day by day, but as well as when something like this happens. So I just finished the essay by saying, having had a long career as an invasive cardiologist prior to joining the faculty of a medical school, I am often asked by residents and fellows about the practice world. I tell them that when they go into practice, they should expect to work very hard all of the time and brutally hard some of the time. I advise them to avoid any practice that expects them to work brutally hard a lot of the time. Such a practice triggers survival behavior contrary to the well-being of the physician, her or his loved ones, the greater community, and ultimately patients. Such a practice dictates that medicine be lived as prose rather than the poetry it is by nature. I also tell them that there will be periods of self-doubt and remorse, that some memories will haunt them, but that the benefits to self and especially to others of such a life makes it worth living. My hope for them is that they experience and treasure for a long time the best of what it is to be a physician and feast on the goodness of such a life. Returning to the question about does any of these things make any difference to people, I'll tell a very quick story about Dr. John Harper. John Harper is a cardiologist in Dallas who has initiated and runs this conference this week, or annual conference that gives a national award, and it's really quite a good thing. And he likes a lot of what I've written, but he loves this Moonlight Sonata thing. And he told me 2 years ago, I see him every year and he sort of tells me the same thing, but he told me 2 years ago that he not only shares the Moonlight Sonata essay with colleagues and residents, but he has read it himself more than 100 times. The next thing we're going to do fairly quickly, and then have one essay to finish. The next thing begins with two short quotes, and a very short first paragraph of a very long essay published in English Language Notes, which is the University of Colorado English Department Literary Journal. So I'm going to ask Julie to come and help us again.
In the middle of the road of my life, I awoke in a dark wood where the true way was wholly lost. That was Dante Alighieri in Inferno. Let us be merry while we may, and have joy in our minds, for sorrow can catch us whenever it pleases. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. On the gray and icy morning of January 15th, 2009, feedlot workers outside the town of Ray, Colorado, saw a plane descend from the low-lying clouds. The workers watched as the plane passed over them, crossed US Highway 385, and then suddenly plunged straight down and deep into the ground. The 3 people on board, all professional pilots, were killed on impact. One of them was my son.
Except for a poem that Diane and I wrote for Zachary's, our son's memorial service, I couldn't write until 8 or 9 months after that. And I finally wrote an essay called A Journey Beyond Imagining, and a poem called The Teardrop Approach. And I asked so they got accepted by JAMA and Annals. And I asked the editors if it would be okay to publish these things during Thanksgiving week that year, just in case, medical families can be together and somebody might benefit from them. And they were very kind to do that. I'm going to ask Julie again to read part of the teardrop approach. Julie, would you mind doing that for me?
The teardrop approach. Stop. Stop it. Stop what you're doing completely. Listen to me. This could happen to you. Don't think you're protected. We were flourishing before. Perhaps not this exactly, what happened to us, but this. Yes, it's a definite possibility. Out of the blue, this can drop you to your knees time and again, your forehead on the floor like a devout Muslim at prayer, but you convulsing in a way only sobbing brings. It happened to us on what they call a teardrop approach. The plane is passing near where it's going to land, but heading in the opposite direction. They fly it in a long, wide loop in the shape of a teardrop until the plane is back near the starting point and lined up with the runway. But our son's plane never made it to the runway. Country people at their early morning routines saw the plane come out of the clouds, low but flat and level. And then suddenly it pitched straight down and deep into the ground. The 3 lost, all professional pilots, knew they were on a teardrop approach. Those of us at home in the midst of our early morning routines had no idea that we were too. But then the call, and the real teardrops came, and the hole carved in the ground was carved into our hearts to remain his presence and absence ever with us. Flight plans don't call those traveling souls on board for nothing.
Thanks, Julie. The poem continues, but I'm going to leave it here. There are several copies of all kinds of things out there for you to grab if you want some. The accompanying publication was the essay, A Journey Beyond Imagining. And that's just sort of too personal to say very much about, so that's out there as well. But I would like to read just one paragraph toward the end of the essay. It says, this is me speaking, so I have no advice to offer, only a story difficult to share, but which I hope may be of help. The new life clock has ticked off 8 months since I took the call on the hallway phone. Sorrow remains, now felt more as a mantle to be borne than tears to be so often shed. Others who have suffered the loss of one so dear tell me the burden lifts with time. I believe that is true, and the mantle is perceptibly lighter than a few months ago. Love being what it is, I know the mantle will be with me always. Love being what it is, I do not object. And then there's a dedication of the essay to 3 individuals. For Monsieur Pilote, which is my nickname for Zach, because he was a pilot, whom we lost, whom we love, and without whom we must learn to travel on, wounded and incomplete. For any reader who has suffered the loss of one so dear, only you know the journey beyond imagining. I offer you my deepest sympathy and respect. To any reader for whom these words might provide comfort or avoid regret, should such a loss occur. I'm going to end with a few thoughts about another essay called Galileo's Grapes. Galileo's Grapes was the most republished and translated essay. It was published in Portugal as As Uvas de Galileo, Galileo's Grapes. It was published in a medical journal in Tehran in Farsi. And the title of that, I have no idea because it was in Farsi. It was republished in Obstetrics and Gynecology, the Green Journal of OBGYN. The essay begins again with a quote from Galileo. The sun, with all those planets revolving around it, can still ripen a bunch of grapes as if it had nothing else in the universe to do. The essay continues. Not one given to visions, I still feel as if I actually saw them there on the deck as I swam at the old Fitzsimmons Army Hospital pool in Colorado. They were young men, their bodies pale, translucent, and incomplete. Each had a part of an arm or a leg missing, or had some other wound inconsistent with the perfection of the rest of the body. They were World War II GIs recuperating in the 1940s from battle injuries, as so many veterans at Fitzsimmons had before the base was recently decommissioned. Most of them sat on a long wooden bench, silently gazing at the water's reflection. A few moved clumsily for short distances along the deck, some embarrassed by their awkwardness, others visibly frustrated. As I swam, I wondered what it had been like for them to be there and what had happened to them after they left. I felt very sorry about what had happened to them in war and deeply grateful for what they had done for me, unborn, so long ago. Then they were gone, at least from sight. Several examples of gratitude are then listed in the essay, not the least of which was just our being grateful for everybody around us in our daily work in medicine, people just trying to help other people. Like Galileo's Grapes, the medical family inhabits a grand system that is essentially sustaining and nurturing. I put in a bunch of questions again this time. I don't know if the editor gave me any grief about this or not, but this is questions about gratitude directed to the reader. How about you? Who or what has inspired you, given you confidence, sustained you, treated you with respect no matter what category you occupied at the time, reassured you, been loyal, given you hope, been gentle with you, been hard on you when necessary, made you laugh, stayed? Such questions and their answers are completely individual, of course, but without some experience referable to them, you would not be where you are. The essay concludes with a couple of paragraphs that I will read that, and again, I would like, this is directed toward medical people, pretty much physicians, but also PAs, nurse practitioners, nurses, etc. But so anybody who's not one of those who finds themselves in here, I'd like to invite you in. Much of what is wondrous in medicine is communal. We are grateful for the presence of others who share our difficult journey. Even in this supportive environment, though, in matters of patient care, the physician decides and acts alone and lives alone with the results of those decisions. It is this aspect of medicine that delineates reputation from character. Reputation comes from things we do that others know about. Character emanates mostly from actions taken when no one else is looking. My experience convinces me that the great majority of physicians value character far above reputation. They also know the cost of possessing it, a cost not even those closest to us can truly comprehend. Understanding the solitary price paid, perhaps what a physician should be most grateful for is the individual self, for being what physicians are: intrepid, faithful, compassionate, uncompromising in matters of patient care. If you can be totally candid for a moment and contemplate the following quote without pretense or false humility, you may recognize someone you know. Written to describe the face of the dying Gaul, it could as well have been written about healers throughout time, and no less in ours. What we can rely on are the comeliness and iron virtue of the short-lived hero, his loyalty to cause and comrades, his bravery in the face of overwhelming odds, the gargantuan generosity with which he scatters his possessions and his person, and with which he spills his blood. This likely describes you. If so, like the soldiers on the pool deck, you have paid a great price to do a great good and have helped more than you can know. Please accept my admiration and gratitude. Knowing that you were along on the journey feels like the warmth of the sun. Thank you for being here. Thanks for the invitation. Thank you. I will hang around for a while to answer any questions or make comments if you want. So.